My name is Ryan, and this is one of those true scary stories in the woods that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. It happened in early fall, on a weeknight, after I'd promised myself I'd stop letting work swallow my entire life. I live close to a state forest with a short loop trail I've done so many times I could walk it half asleep. That's exactly why I went alone. It wasn't supposed to be an adventure. It was supposed to be a reset. A quick hike, fresh air, back in the car, home. The plan was simple: park, walk the loop, be back before it got fully dark. I'd done it before. Plenty of times. The trailhead is only a few minutes from the lot, and the lot itself is small, just gravel, a weathered sign, and a couple of wooden posts to keep cars from rolling too far. No gates. No ranger station. No cameras. Just trees and silence. I remember noticing the sky on the drive over. That washed out, late daylight that makes everything look flat. Like the world is already fading. I told myself I had time. I always told myself that. By the time I pulled into the parking area, there were only 2 other cars, and they looked like they'd been there for a while. I didn't recognize them, but that wasn't unusual. The forest is used by hikers, dog walkers, people cutting through to fish. I cut the engine and sat for a second, listening. The kind of quiet you only get away from town. No traffic. No voices. Just a faint, constant hiss of wind moving through the canopy. I checked my phone. Low signal. One bar that flickered like it couldn't decide if it wanted to exist. I shrugged it off. I wasn't planning to be out long. And I wasn't going deep. This was the safe trail. The familiar trail. I grabbed my keys, shoved them into my pocket, and felt that small metal weight settle there like an anchor, proof I'd be leaving the same way I came. I locked the car out of habit, heard the beep, and started walking toward the trailhead. The first few minutes were normal. Leaves crunching under my shoes, the air cooling faster than it should, the smell of damp soil and pine. The path narrowed quickly, and the trees closed in overhead, turning the fading daylight into something dimmer. Something colder. Still, I didn't feel scared. Not yet. I knew this place. I knew how long the loop took. I knew where the trail bent left near the old fallen log, where it dipped into that shallow ravine, where the ground got muddy after rain. My whole mindset was confidence. Routine. Control. But as the woods swallowed the last of the daylight, I noticed how fast it happened. One moment I could see the path clearly, and the next it felt like the shadows thickened all at once. The kind of change that makes you pause without realizing you've paused. I told myself I'd turn around soon. I told myself the parking lot was close. And I kept walking anyway. When the trail finally opened up and I saw the parking area again, I felt that quick wave of relief people get when they spot something familiar in the dark. The lot was exactly where it was supposed to be, same patch of gravel, same wooden posts lining the edge, the same weathered sign near the entrance with faded rules nobody reads. It should have felt like the end of the hike. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something. The first thing I noticed was how empty it looked. When I arrived earlier, there were 2 other cars. I remembered them clearly because it made me feel better about being out there alone. It meant other people were around. It meant I wasn't the last person in the forest. Now they were gone. No headlights fading down the road. No engine sounds. No doors closing. Just, gone. The parking lot felt wider without them, like the darkness had more space to spread out. My car was the only one left, sitting near the far edge of the gravel, half surrounded by shadow from the trees. From a distance it looked less like a vehicle and more like a shape someone had placed there on purpose. I stopped walking and listened, letting the silence settle. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that makes you aware of your own body. The sound of my shoes grinding small stones. The faint breath leaving my mouth. The soft rustle of my jacket every time I moved. It all sounded too loud, like the woods were amplifying every tiny mistake I made. Beyond the lot, there were a few distant lights. Not many. Maybe a house somewhere behind the tree line, maybe a road far off. They were weak and far apart, like they didn't belong to the same place. They didn't help me feel safe. They made the lot feel even more isolated, like I was standing in a pocket of darkness cut out from the rest of the world. The tree line pressed in on every side. Dense. Black. Even though there was still a little light left in the sky, it didn't reach under the canopy. The forest was like a wall, and the lot was the only clearing. I found myself scanning the edges of the gravel, not because I saw anything, but because my brain suddenly started supplying possibilities. A person could stand just inside the trees and I'd never see them. Someone could watch the lot without moving. Someone could be there the whole time and I'd walk right past, assuming it was just another trunk, another shadow, another part of the woods. That's the thing about true scary stories in the woods, the fear doesn't come all at once. It leaks in. Quietly. It takes normal details and turns them into questions. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around my keys. The metal was cold. I pulled them out and held them tight, like the weight of them proved something. Like as long as I had the keys, I had control. The small click of them shifting in my hand sounded sharp in the open lot, and I immediately hated that I'd made any noise at all. I started walking toward my car, but slower than I meant to. I didn't go straight to the driver's side like I usually would. I drifted a few steps wider, trying to get a better angle on the interior through the windows, trying to see if anything looked different. It was irrational, and I knew it. I'd parked it myself. I'd locked it myself. Nothing should have changed. Still, I kept looking. My car's windows reflected the trees, turning the glass into dark mirrors. My own silhouette moved across them as I approached, distorted and stretched, like the reflection was someone else pacing alongside me. The gravel crunched with every step. The sound carried, and I could feel it traveling out into the forest like a signal. I reached the front of the car and paused. A small part of me expected to see the other cars return, like I'd simply missed them leaving. I expected to hear a distant engine. I expected anything that would make the lot feel normal again. Nothing happened. No new sounds. No movement. No reassuring sign of life. Just my car. Just the trees. Just the feeling that the world had narrowed down to this one empty place, and that if something went wrong, there wasn't anyone close enough to hear it. I stood there for a few seconds too long, keys clenched, staring at the dark glass, telling myself to unlock the door and get in. The closer I got to doing it, the more my instincts pulled back, like my body didn't want me trapped inside something with windows on all sides. And then I realized how late it really was. The last of the light was draining from the sky fast. Fog was starting to drift low across the gravel, thin at first, then thicker near the ground. It blurred the edges of my tires and made the car look like it was floating in the darkness. I took one more look at the tree line. I didn't see anyone. But I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched anyway. And in that moment, standing alone in an empty lot, I understood why people end up as stories, why True Scary Stories Forest and True Scary Stories animated channels have endless material. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see. It's what the silence makes you imagine. I finally moved my hand toward the door handle. And that's when the night really started. The second my hand touched the car door handle, I stopped. Not because I heard something. Not because I saw movement. I stopped because the silence felt wrong. It wasn't the normal quiet of a forest at night. It was too complete. Like someone had reached out and turned the volume down on the entire world. I pulled my hand back and looked around again, forcing myself to be rational. I told myself it was late. I told myself the other cars leaving had probably spooked me more than I wanted to admit. I told myself I was overthinking it. Then I took my phone out. The screen lit up my hands in a pale glow that felt way too bright against the darkness. I checked the signal. One bar flashed, then vanished. For a second it showed SOS, then went back to nothing. I refreshed it again, like that would change the reality of where I was. Nothing. No service. No data. No comfort. It's strange how quickly a phone becomes a lifeline when you realize you can't use it. Even if you don't plan to call anyone, the idea that you could matters. The moment that option is gone, your brain starts listing everything that could happen next. And the list gets dark fast. I turned in a slow circle, holding the phone up like a stupid offering to the sky, as if moving 2 feet in any direction would magically connect me to the world again. The trees stood in perfect stillness, their bare branches weaving together overhead. The fog hugged the gravel, sliding around my shoes like cold breath. I tried to focus on the normal details. The crunch of gravel. The distant lights beyond the lot. The faint smell of wet leaves. The fact that I could still hear the wind-up high. But something else was missing. Noise. Not human noise. Forest noise. No insects. No frogs. No distant birds shifting in branches. No small animals scurrying in the underbrush. Even the wind that I could see moving the tops of the trees didn't seem to make sound down here, near the ground. The clearing felt suspended. Like the woods were holding their breath. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to convince myself it was just a lull. Maybe the temperature dropped and everything went still. Maybe the fog muffled sound. Maybe I was so keyed up that my brain was filtering out anything that wasn't a threat. But the quiet didn't feel natural. It felt like a pause. Like the moment in a horror movie where the music cuts out right before something steps into frame. I lowered the phone and listened harder, almost angry at my own fear. My ears strained so much it actually hurt. I wanted a cough from deep in the trees. A snap of a twig. Anything that would prove the world was still moving. And then I realized the worst part. If something made a sound right now, it would be obvious. There was nothing to blend into. No background noise to hide footsteps. No insects to cover a small movement. If someone was out there, they wouldn't need to be fast. They wouldn't need to be loud. They would just need to move once, and I'd hear it. That thought made my skin prickle. I looked toward the trail entrance, the dark cut between trees where I'd come out. The sign was barely visible now, just a pale rectangle near the edge of the lot. The path beyond it was black. Not just shadowy. Black. Like it swallowed the last bits of moonlight and kept it. I remembered how easily I'd walked in earlier, thinking it was a quick loop. I remembered how confident I'd been. And standing there now, with my car as the only object in the clearing, I suddenly felt like I'd returned to a different place than the one I'd left. I checked my keys again, as if they could reassure me. The metal was cold enough to bite my palm. I kept my phone in the other hand even though it was useless, because holding it made me feel less alone. Like it still connected me to something, even if it didn't. I tried one more time to get a signal. I toggled airplane mode on and off. I waited. Nothing changed. The screen showed me my own reflection, eyes wide, face pale in the glow, then dimmed again. That's when another realization hit me. If something happened out here, there would be no quick call. No, just in case. No easy solution. It would be me, in this clearing, with no one around and no way to reach anyone. And the silence in the woods made that feel final. I turned toward my car again, forcing myself to move. My fingers wrapped around the door handle a second time, and I pulled. The door didn't open right away. It hesitated. Like the seal was stuck from the cold, or like I hadn't pulled hard enough. That tiny resistance made my stomach drop. A normal thing. A stupid thing. But in that moment, it felt like the car was telling me something. I pulled again, harder. And somewhere behind me, near the tree line, something made the softest sound. So soft I wasn't even sure it was real. But it was enough. Because in a place this quiet, one small sound is never nothing. The sound happened right as I pulled the door a second time. A tiny noise from the tree line. Not a branch snapping, not a leaf crunching, nothing that belonged out here. It was sharper than that. Cleaner. Like a soft mechanical click. I froze with my hand on the handle. For a few seconds I didn't move at all. I didn't even breathe normally. I just listened, trying to decide if my brain had invented it. The woods were so quiet that my own heartbeat felt like the loudest thing in the clearing. Nothing followed. No footsteps. No rustling. No animal running off. Just the same held, unnatural stillness. I stared at the dark edge where the gravel met the trees. Fog drifted across the ground in slow sheets, making the whole place look smeared, like the world wasn't rendering correctly. That's the only way I can describe it. Like reality had a glitch. I told myself it could have been my car. The door latch. The key fob shifting in my pocket. A cooling engine tick. Any normal explanation. But that wasn't where the sound came from. I knew it. It came from the trees. From the line where you stop seeing depth and everything becomes a single black wall. I finally opened the car door and the interior light flared on, spilling weak yellow onto the gravel. It should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel exposed. Like I'd just lit myself up on a stage. I didn't get in right away. I leaned forward, scanning the front seats, the floor, the back seat. It was empty. Exactly how I left it. No movement. No shapes. No surprise. Still, I kept my body angled toward the tree line as I checked. Like turning my back felt dangerous. Like the moment I looked away, something would cross that gap between the woods and the lot. Then I heard it again. Another faint click. Closer this time. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just, wrong. The kind of sound you'd expect from a door unlocking. Or plastic shifting. Or someone's boot scraping a small rock and immediately trying to stop. I shut the car door without thinking. The interior light vanished, and the clearing dropped back into darkness. For a second I regretted it, because now I couldn't see as well. But the darkness felt safer than being lit up. My phone was still in my hand. I turned the screen on again, mostly out of habit, and watched the signal flicker between nothing and SOS. It looked pathetic. A silent promise it couldn't keep. I lowered the phone and listened harder. That's when I noticed another detail that didn't make sense. The fog. It wasn't drifting evenly across the lot anymore. It was moving in a way that looked interrupted. Like something had passed through it near the tree line. Something tall enough to cut a thin gap in the haze. I stared, trying to catch it again. The fog smoothed out. Then, for a brief second, it shifted again in the same spot, like something invisible had stepped back. My skin went cold. I took a slow step away from the trees and closer to the driver's door. The gravel made a soft crunch under my shoe, and immediately I hated myself for it. The sound felt like an announcement. The woods stayed silent. Then, from somewhere inside the darkness, came a sound that finally pushed me past uncertainty. A quiet, deliberate exhale. Not mine. It was subtle, like someone trying not to be heard. But it carried in that dead still air, and it came from the same direction as the clicks. The first real proof that I wasn't alone didn't come as a scream or a sudden movement. It came as a breath in the dark. And in that moment, with no service, no other cars, and no noise to hide behind, I understood that whatever was out there wasn't lost. It was waiting. I didn't get into the car. Not yet. I stood there beside the driver's door with my keys in one hand and my phone in the other. Both of them feeling useless in different ways. I kept my eyes on the tree line, trying to convince myself that what I'd heard was a normal forest sound. A deer breathing. Wind through leaves. Anything. But the woods didn't give me anything to work with. No movement. No rustling. No return to normal. Just that silence, and the feeling that I had made myself the only obvious thing in the clearing. For a second, I actually considered walking back onto the trail. Not deep, just a few steps in, to get out of the open lot and into cover. It was a stupid thought, but fear makes stupid ideas feel logical. The car felt like a trap with windows. The clearing felt like a spotlight. The trees, somehow, felt safer. So I backed away from the car. Slowly. Quietly. The gravel resisted every step, crunching softly no matter how careful I tried to be. I kept my body angled toward the woods, and I kept telling myself that if there was someone out there, I would see them before they moved. I was wrong to believe that, but I believed it anyway. I reached the edge of the lot where the trail began, and I stopped under the first line of trees. The air felt colder instantly, like the canopy sealed me inside a different temperature. The fog was thicker here too, curling around the trunks and swallowing the space between them. I looked back at my car. It sat alone in the gravel, dark and still, the way a car should be when nobody's inside it. I could barely make out the shape of the rear bumper. The windows were black. The whole thing looked like an abandoned prop in a scene that didn't belong to me. I took a breath, then another. And that's when it happened. The brake lights came on. Bright red. Sudden. Violent in the darkness. Two perfect circles of light that lit up the fog behind the car and painted the gravel with a dull crimson glow. For half a second, my brain refused to process it. It felt impossible, like my eyes had glitched. Then my stomach dropped so hard it made me feel nauseous. Because I had the keys. I knew I had the keys. They were biting into my palm. The lights stayed on for a heartbeat longer than they should have. Long enough for me to imagine a foot pressing down on the pedal. Long enough to picture a body in the driver's seat, close enough for the dashboard to reflect faintly in the glass. Then the lights shut off. Instantly. Cleanly. Like someone lifted their foot. The clearing went dark again, and the red afterimage burned behind my eyes. I didn't move. I didn't even blink right away. I stood under the trees with my mouth slightly open, listening for anything, door movement, an engine turning, the soft click of a lock. Something that would confirm what I'd just seen. Nothing. The car didn't start. The horn didn't beep. The interior light didn't flick on. There was no sound of a door opening. Just that same silence, now sharper, now heavier, now full of meaning. My phone screen lit up again in my hand because I'd gripped it too hard. No service. Still nothing. The world felt sealed off, like the forest was its own closed system and I was trapped inside it. I looked toward the tree line behind the car, trying to see if someone had moved away from it after reaching the vehicle. The fog drifted lazily through the clearing, giving me nothing but shifting gray shapes. Then I realized something that made my skin crawl. Whoever did that, knew exactly where I was standing. Because from the driver's seat, the dark line of trees where I was hiding would be the first place to look. And if the brake lights were a signal, it wasn't an accident. It was a message. I tightened my grip on the keys until it hurt, and for the first time all night I understood the real danger of true scary stories in the woods. Out here, the scariest thing isn't getting lost. It's being found. The first thing I did, before my brain even caught up, was check my keys. I pulled them out and held them right under my phone's dim screen, like I needed proof. The metal glinted for a second, then dulled again. House key. Car key. The chipped plastic fob. Everything exactly where it should be. Everything in my hand. That should have calmed me down. Instead, it made the whole situation worse. Because if my keys were right here, then there was no logical reason for anything about my car to change. No reason for a door to unlock. No reason for the interior light to flicker the way it had. No reason for those sounds to be coming from the tree line as if someone was testing something. I stood with my back close to the car, shoulders tight, trying to keep my breathing quiet. The fog kept moving across the gravel, thin and cold, and it felt like it was crawling around my ankles. Every time it shifted, my eyes tried to turn it into a shape. I forced myself to think in a straight line. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was a deer stepping near the edge of the lot, close enough to move the fog and make a noise, then freezing when it saw me. That happened. Deer did that. But deer didn't click. Deer didn't exhale like that. Deer didn't move with intention. Maybe it was the car settling. Maybe the door latch, maybe the metal contracting in the cold, maybe the brakes cooling. I'd heard cars make noises after turning them off. Little ticks. Pops. Quiet mechanical sounds that meant nothing. Except the sound I heard wasn't from the car. It was from the woods. I squeezed the keys until the ridges bit into my palm. It was a stupid reflex, like keys could become a weapon if you believed hard enough. I hated myself for doing it, but I didn't stop. I looked down at the fob and hovered my thumb over the buttons. Unlock. Lock. Trunk. Panic. The panic button was the obvious choice. Bright noise. Flashing lights. Something that would announce me to the whole forest. And that was exactly why I didn't press it. If no one was out there, I'd look paranoid. And if someone was out there, I didn't know what a loud alarm would do. I didn't know if it would scare them off, or make them move faster. That was the moment fear really settled in. Not like a jump scare. Like a wait. It wasn't the idea of a monster. It was the idea of a person. A person who had been close enough to breathe without being seen. Close enough to make a sound and stop. Close enough to be deliberate. The kind of person who didn't trip over branches or shuffle their feet. The kind of person who understood that the woods at night could hide them better than any locked door ever could. My phone screen dimmed again. I tapped it back on and checked the signal one more time, even though I already knew. Nothing. Just that useless SOS flicker that felt more like a joke than a feature. I stared at my car, trying to decide what was safer. Getting inside and locking the doors, or staying outside where I could run. Inside, I'd have a barrier. Glass and metal. A horn. Inside, I'd also be trapped in a box with windows on every side. Outside, I had space. Movement. Options. Outside, I also had nothing between me and the tree line. I kept my eyes on the darkness and did the only thing I could think to do. I listened for patterns. For repetition. For the smallest proof of intent. And that's when I noticed something that made my throat go dry. The woods weren't just quiet. They were quiet in a way that felt managed. Like something out there was trying to be careful. Like the silence wasn't accidental. I stood there, keys clenched, running out of explanations and running out of time. And somewhere beyond the fog, something shifted again, just enough to remind me it hadn't left. I stood there with my keys clenched in my fist, staring into the tree line until my eyes started playing tricks on me. Fog drifted low across the gravel, smoothing everything into soft shapes. The lot felt suspended in time. Like the woods were waiting for me to make the next move. I told myself I was done hesitating. I needed to get in the car, lock the doors, and leave. The road out was a straight shot back toward town. A few minutes. That was it. If I could just get the engine on, if I could just get the headlights cutting through the fog, the fear would shrink back into something I could laugh at later. I reached for the driver's door again, moving slowly, keeping my body turned so I could still see the trees. I didn't like the idea of turning my back. Not even for a second. The silence felt too intentional for that. My hand touched the handle. And before I pulled it, the car changed. The brake lights turned on. Not a quick flash this time. Not a flicker that could be explained away as a glitch or reflection. The red lights bloomed bright and steady, casting a dull crimson glow onto the fog behind the car. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't ambiguous. It was like someone inside had pressed their foot down on the brake and held it there. My blood ran cold. I froze in place, arm half raised, key still in my fist. I stared at the rear of the car, trying to understand what I was seeing. In that dim red spill of light, the fog looked thicker. Almost alive. The gravel behind the tires took on a wet, dark sheen. I glanced down at my keys again without meaning to. A stupid reflex. The same desperate need for proof. The key fob was still in my hand. The panic button was right there under my thumb, begging to be pressed. I couldn't do it. Because now it wasn't just fear. It was certainty. Someone was close enough to control something. Close enough to make my car respond like it was occupied. And if I hit the alarm, all I'd be doing is telling whoever was out there exactly where I was standing. The brake light stayed on. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. Too many. I tried to see inside the car through the rear window. All I saw was darkness and reflections, trees, fog, my own faint outline moving as I shifted my weight. No obvious silhouette. No face. No movement. But the light stayed steady, unwavering, as if a foot was planted hard on that pedal. The air felt colder. My breath came faster and looked like smoke in front of my face. I swallowed and realized my mouth had gone completely dry. I backed away from the car without taking my eyes off it. One slow step. Then another. Gravel crunched under my shoes, loud enough to make me flinch. I moved until I was closer to the open center of the lot, putting a little distance between myself and the driver's door. The red glow still burned behind me. And then, from the tree line, I heard that same soft mechanical click again. Closer. Sharper. Like a signal. Like confirmation. My heart hammered hard enough that it felt like it could carry into the woods. I tried to control my breathing, but it kept slipping into short, panicked pulls. I knew, suddenly and clearly, that I wasn't dealing with something random. This wasn't a ghost story feeling. This wasn't a, maybe it's the wind, moment. This was someone doing things on purpose. I kept staring at the car, waiting for the brake lights to shut off. They didn't. And the longer they stayed on, the more it felt like a message. Like whoever was out there wanted me to know they could make my car behave like it was already theirs. Like they could turn my only way out into part of the trap. I stood in the middle of that empty lot, keys clenched so tight they hurt, watching my own car glow red in the fog. And realizing that getting inside might be the most dangerous thing I could do. I don't know how long I stood there with the keys digging into my palm, listening to nothing. Time didn't feel normal in that clearing. The fog kept sliding across the gravel like it had somewhere to be, and the trees stayed perfectly still, like the forest was doing its best impression of an empty place. But I couldn't stay frozen forever. At some point my brain clicked into survival mode and started thinking in ugly, practical steps. If someone was out there, the worst thing I could do was walk straight to my car like everything was fine. The second worst thing I could do was turn my back on the tree line. So I moved, carefully. I shifted away from the driver's door and angled toward the edge of the lot, keeping the car between me and the darkest section of woods. My feet placed themselves deliberately on the gravel, trying to minimize sound. It didn't matter. Every step still felt like an announcement. Every crunch of stone sounded amplified, like a microphone pointed at my fear. I worked my way toward the posts at the perimeter, where the gravel met the leaf litter. The idea was to use the trees as cover, get a better angle. See movement if there was any. It felt ridiculous because I was alone, with no service, no flashlight strong enough to matter, no weapon other than keys and panic. But it also felt like the only move that wasn't surrender. The closer I got to the tree line, the colder the air felt. Not just night cold. Different. Damp. Heavy. Like the fog was thicker there for a reason. I kept my eyes on the places where the darkness looked deeper, where branches layered into something almost solid. I took another step off the gravel and onto the leaves. That's when I saw it. At first it was just a shape in the mess of brown and gray. A slightly darker patch. A disturbance. The kind of thing you'd ignore in daylight because the forest floor is never smooth. But under that faint, watery light, it stood out. Fresh scuff marks. Leaves pushed aside in a narrow path that didn't match mine. I knew exactly where I had walked when I came out of the trail. I had stepped over the same flat rock, avoided the same muddy strip, followed the same packed down dirt. This was different. This was off to the side of the lot, closer to where no one would normally exit unless they were trying not to be seen. I crouched down slowly, keeping my shoulders tight, listening between movements. The leaves weren't just disturbed. They were pressed in a way that suggested weight. Someone had stood there. Not hours ago. Recently. The edges of the leaves were still lifted like they hadn't settled back into place yet. The soil under them looked darker, freshly exposed. I felt a wave of cold creep up my spine. I scanned the ground for a footprint and found something worse than a clear shoe print. A partial impression. Not enough to identify a brand. Not enough to be evidence. Just enough to confirm a heel had dug in and pivoted. Like someone had been standing at the tree line, watching the lot, then shifted their stance when I moved. My mouth went dry. I swallowed and realized my breathing was loud again. I forced it down, made myself smaller, and leaned closer to the ground like it would tell me what happened. The disturbed leaves made a line, faint but deliberate, running parallel to the lot. Not toward the trail. Not toward the road. Along the edge, where the fog was thickest and the trees offered the most cover. It looked like a path someone would take if they wanted to stay hidden. I backed up from the spot without standing fully, stepping carefully onto the gravel again. My eyes stayed locked on the tree line. I kept expecting the darkness to change shape, to reveal a face, a shoulder, a silhouette. Nothing. And that was the worst part. Because the ground was telling me one thing, and the forest was pretending nothing was there. I held my keys tighter and started moving again, slowly circling to change my angle, trying to see behind the first layer of trunks. I was doing what I'd seen in movies, and I hated myself for it. But fear makes you copy whatever you think might work. Then I noticed a second disturbance, closer to my car. A thin line through the fog near the rear tire, like something had passed there. The leaves at the edge of the gravel looked crushed in a new direction, leading not to the trail but toward the darker side of the lot. Toward where my car sat alone. I stopped, perfectly still. In that moment it hit me that I wasn't just checking. I was approaching a place someone else had already approached first. And whatever was out there had been close enough to leave marks. Close enough to wait. Close enough to let me come to my own car, like it belonged to them now, not me. I don't remember making the decision to go back to the car. I just remember my feet moving, slow at first, then steadier, like my body had accepted that standing in the open wasn't helping. The brake lights were off again by the time I approached, and that somehow made it worse. It felt like whatever caused it had finished proving its point. The fog was thicker now, clinging to the gravel and curling around the tires. My car sat there like a dark shape with reflective glass, waiting. I kept my keys in my fist like a weapon, thumb hovering over the fob, but I still couldn't bring myself to hit the panic button. The idea of flashing lights in an empty forest felt like painting a target on my own chest. I reached the driver's side and didn't touch the handle immediately. I leaned in close to the window, trying to see inside without changing anything. The interior was dim, only faintly visible through reflections of trees. I could see the outline of the steering wheel. The headrest. The pale shape of the passenger seat. Everything looked normal. Then I saw it. Not a handprint. Not a footprint. Not something obvious and cinematic. Something worse. Something subtle enough that my brain tried to deny it for a full second. The glass was fogged. Just a patch of it, low on the inside of the driver's window, like warm breath had hit cold glass and left a cloudy oval. It wasn't on the outside. The outside air was too cold and too dry for that. This was on the inside, soft, uneven, with the faint streaks you get when someone leans close and exhales without thinking. I stared at it until my eyes watered. I hadn't been inside the car since I parked. I hadn't opened the door. I hadn't turned the heater on. And yet there it was, a fresh fog mark that looked like it had been made recently. The edges were still defined. Not fully evaporated. My throat tightened. I felt the hair rise on my arms. I shifted my angle slightly, trying to convince myself it was leftover condensation from earlier. Maybe humidity trapped in the car. Maybe the temperature dropping fast. I wanted that explanation so badly I could feel myself reaching for it. Then I noticed the second detail. The driver's seat wasn't where I left it. It was only a little off. Maybe an inch. Maybe less. But I knew my driving position. I'm picky about it. The seat was pushed back just enough that the steering wheel looked slightly farther away than it should have. That tiny difference hit me like a punch to the stomach. Because it meant someone had been in there. Someone had sat down. Someone had moved the seat. Someone had breathed onto the window. And the brake lights suddenly made perfect sense. I backed away from the door without turning my back to the forest. My keys slipped in my sweaty grip and I clenched them harder. I felt nauseous, like my body was trying to reject the reality in front of me. The car wasn't just a car anymore. It was evidence. It was a message. Then the smell reached me. It wasn't strong, but it was wrong. A sour, human smell leaking through the door seams, like damp clothes, old sweat, and something metallic underneath. The kind of smell you catch in a crowded elevator for a half second and immediately want to get away from. It didn't belong in my clean car. I stood there in the fog, staring at that breath mark on the glass, staring at the seat position, feeling that smell crawl into my lungs. The fear changed shape. Up to that point, my mind had been fighting uncertainty. Maybe. Probably. Could be. Now it was fact. And the worst part was what that fact implied. If someone had been inside my car, then they had been close enough to watch me walk out of the woods. Close enough to wait until the lot was empty. Close enough to get in without me hearing the door open. Close enough to still be out there. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear branches snap. I didn't hear breathing this time. But the woods were still too quiet. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the quiet wasn't empty. It was hiding something. I don't remember unlocking the door. I don't remember sitting down. I just remember the moment the engine turned over and the dashboard lit up, because it felt like oxygen hitting my lungs after being underwater. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys, and when I finally put the car in drive, the tires spit gravel behind me like the lot was trying to hold on. The headlights cut through the fog in a weak cone. Everything beyond that cone was nothing. I didn't look back at the tree line when I pulled out. I couldn't. Some part of me was sure that if I looked into the darkness, I'd actually see him. And then I'd have to carry that image home with me forever. So I kept my eyes forward and drove. The road out of the forest was narrow and empty. A ribbon of black with damp leaves scattered along the edges. No streetlights. No houses close enough to feel real. Just the pale beam of my headlights and the constant feeling that the darkness was pressing in from both sides. I kept checking my rearview mirror anyway. At first, there was nothing behind me. Just fog and the faint glow of my own taillights reflecting back in the haze. I told myself that was it. I was safe. I was leaving it behind. Then, a few minutes later, I saw headlights. Two small points of light far back on the same road. It could have been anyone. Another hiker leaving late. Someone who lived nearby. A normal car on a normal road. I tried to let that thought settle. But the headlights didn't behave like normal. They didn't close the distance quickly, like someone driving the speed limit and catching up. They stayed back, perfectly measured. Not too far to lose sight of me, not close enough to be obvious. They matched my speed through every bend. When I slowed slightly around a curve, they slowed. When I sped up on a straight stretch, they sped up. It felt like they were tied to me. My phone still had no service. I tried anyway. Nothing. I watched the screen glow uselessly in my hand and felt my stomach tighten all over again. Out here, it didn't matter that I had a car. It didn't matter that I was moving. I was still alone. The headlights stayed behind me the whole way out of the forest. And when I finally reached the first lit intersection, one lonely gas station with a buzzing sign and a small pool of yellow light, I made a choice without thinking. I didn't go straight home. I pulled into the gas station lot, fast, like I was cutting an angle. The headlights behind me slowed. They didn't pull in. They didn't pass. They just hovered on the road for a moment, like whoever was driving needed to decide something. Then they turned off onto the shoulder and sat there, facing the station from a distance. That was the moment my fear turned into something heavier than panic. Because it wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was control. I sat in my car under that gas station light, pretending to look at my phone, pretending to be calm, while my heart hammered so hard I thought it would shake the steering wheel. The car on the road stayed still. The headlights didn't move. Like they were watching. I waited until another vehicle pulled into the station, just a normal truck, someone getting gas. Only then did the headlights finally move. Slowly. They rolled forward, past the entrance, and disappeared down the road, the same direction I would have taken to go home. I waited longer. Then I drove the opposite way. I took back roads. I made unnecessary turns. I looped through neighborhoods I didn't need to loop through, watching my mirrors until my eyes hurt. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd convinced myself I was being ridiculous. But when I turned my porch light on, something caught my eye. A thin smear of mud on the edge of my rear bumper. Fresh. Not dried, not dust. Mud that didn't match my driveway. Mud that looked like it came from the forest. I stared at it for a long time, feeling cold all the way through. Maybe it was already there. Maybe I didn't notice it earlier. Maybe it flicked up from the lot when I sped out. But it didn't feel like maybe anymore. It felt like a mark. Like proof I'd been close to someone I never saw. Like a reminder that a person could get into my car, breathe on my window, move my seat, and disappear, without making a sound. That night I didn't sleep. Every time a car passed outside, I sat up and listened. Every time the house creaked, I held my breath. I kept checking the locks like it would change anything. Because the scariest part wasn't the empty lot. It was realizing someone had been close enough to follow me out of the woods. And close enough to learn where I live.